Hello, everyone. Welcome to Thrivecast. I'm Alan Wallner, the president and visionary of Conscious Branding. And with Thrivecast, our intention is to focus on you, your business, and your success. And with each episode, we discuss at a high level topics to spark new thoughts, generate ideas, and to push the boundaries of what we know is familiar. And hopefully we may even frame up a new mindset to ignite your business forward and inspire action. Wow, in more ways than one, 2020 has been a year of divisiveness and conflict. Despite this, I continue to believe that people want to help one another and be more connected and to be at peace. And, the broader discussion about the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion have sparked a deeper look at the very fabric of our lives, our beliefs, and our core values. And it's time to really look at and to open our eyes to what is happening around us. Because it's not easy, or I should say it's easy to not rock the boat, but it takes a little more to actually make some waves and to make some changes. So true change can only be accomplished with transformational leadership. I'm sure that's why we're all here. We're all business owners and we're all leaders. So as business owners, we have to ask ourselves, how do diversity, equity, and inclusion impact my way of being aware and present, and also the way I lead my business? So in this episode, we'll discuss what you can do beyond politics. We'll look at what you can do to take action in the day-to-day business environment and sustain it. What you can do to change your world and influence your clients, employees, partners, community, and followers. But before we get started, I'd like to welcome our panelists. We have Dr. Aparajita Jeedigunta. She's also known as AJ, and she's the founder and CEO of AJ Rao LLC. Sorry if I didn't say, I think it's AJ Rao. And Dr. AJ is a strategist, trainer, and coach for diversity, equity, inclusion, belongingness, and leadership. And she's also the creator of a culturally competent conversations for equity and belongingness, also known as C3EB Summit, that's coming up here on November 19th and 20th. So if you get a chance, check that out. We'll have a link to it on our landing page for the recording of this as well. AJ, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Alan.
All right, and then we have Heather Nunley, who's here today. She's the founder and CEO of Cultural Fuel Group. And Heather works with business leaders to elevate accountability and advance top talent. She's dedicated to creating workplaces that are more innovative, focused, and engaged. Heather is passionate about helping leaders intentionally manage culture, improve results, better retain employees, and deliver greater customer satisfaction. Welcome, and it's good to have you here, Heather.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be with you all.
Sure. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. So let's go ahead and get started. This one's been really kind of rampant and a lot of discussions around it. But I want to start really taking a look at what we can do here as smaller businesses, business owners, and how we can have an impact. But I thought I'd start with kind of talking a little bit about both of you. You both have companies that promote, support, and help implement diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's also known as DEI, programs and policies in the workplace. And I guess I want to start with kind of what was the inspiring moment that led you to have this as a core competency in your business? And with that, I think we'll start with Heather.
Well, our core purpose at Cultural Fuel Group is to advance leadership. And we believe very strongly that connected cultures are what really fuels growth. And we do that by building high performance leaders, teams, and cultures that are focused on belonging and also on the power of individuality. Because this work, it's for me, it's always been threaded throughout the fabric of my career in retail and hospitality prior to me venturing out to become a consultant on my own. And now working with business leaders, whether they're owners of very small outsourced teams or those that are trying to scale and ramp up their teams in their business. Early in my career as an HR director, I had the privilege of engaging in diversity initiatives as part of employee resource groups, which some of you may be familiar with within organizations. And with that work, I would help to reveal any relevant opportunities where we might be able to expand upon any current diversity initiatives that may have been placed to figure out how it is that we might be able to better serve our diverse communities and customers and even the employee base. So while working with those bigger brands with strong cultures like Nordstrom and Marriott, I began to facilitate some of that diversity and equity and inclusion training myself, and also address day-to-day real life workplace issues related to belonging at work. So with that experience and that training underneath my belt, the benefits of inclusion and differentiation were really very much instilled in my own personal leadership style. It's what I know. So when I started my own business, this work seemed to be really integral and natural and necessary, quite honestly, to helping smaller companies that I work with to drive growth with inclusive leadership.
When you were working with these companies, what were, because they were larger companies, so what seemed to kind of be their biggest challenges that they were dealing with?
A lot of the work that I would do being an HR director was very much related to interpersonal communications amongst, staff members, leaders, teams, that sort of thing. So a lot of what became formed as it relates to different policies and that sort of things, they would come from real life experiences that would actually happen on a day-to-day basis. So, it could be, microaggressions that one employee may experience and, comes and shares feedback around that. And quite honestly, various other things too. Relatability, when we talk diversity, when we're looking at, a younger generation versus an older generation, there are differences that arise there as well. So it really could be just about anything.
Sure. Yeah. Because culture goes quite broad. So, wow. Okay. AJ, I'd like to kind of ask you that same question, kind of what was happening in your life and kind of what inspired you to kind of start making this part of your business?
Absolutely. So my story is actually almost the flip side of the coin of Heather's, in that I came from I was in a space of being the individual contributor and being on the receiving end in various spaces, mostly academic, but also other, side jobs and summer jobs and all of that through college, seeing these spaces. And, this was before DEI work became as normative as it is now. But even in those, kind of seeing how people who were different were being treated. And of course, I was different. Just not just, because of my skin color or because I'm a woman, I'm also an immigrant, or an immigrant's child. And so going through all of that, then I went to grad school and I was studying this, social psychology, group dynamics, interpersonal relationships, conflict management, all of these were sort of my cup of tea anyway. And, but I always thought, I'd end up in academia. And then I died because of a traumatic brain injury. And when I was brought back and I had to recover, all of a sudden it was this really stark contrast I was seeing, because things weren't making sense, because I had to relearn who I was, I had to relearn about my family, I had to relearn all of that stuff. But outside of that, how diversity, equity, and inclusion, and more importantly, how belongingness was getting minimized, was getting rendered invisible, and how we were all internalizing those messages and rendering ourselves invisible. So it was through my personal journey of recovery, as I was kind of figuring that out, I was also applying for corporate jobs to go back into the workforce. And that's when I really started seeing all of these societal messages that and then it wasn't just me. All of these societal messages that tell us we're not enough, that we don't quite belong because we don't quite fit the mold, that we in many ways deserve to be marginalized because we're different. And then again, how we internalize that, and then create these stories for ourselves of, we're never going to be enough. This is our lot in life. Things are never going to change. What can I do as one person? You know, any of these sound familiar? Because these were what was going through my mind, except I had solutions, you know, because of my training, because of my lived experiences, because of all of that. So I said, okay, I know I'm smart. I get it. Corporate thinks I'm unemployable. Doesn't mean I am. So the best way to break that mold, the best way to break that myth is to break it. And let's see where it goes. And that's where I started. And so our motto at AJ Rao is making the invisible visible for better equity and belongingness. And that's where that came from.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. And, you know, it is so interesting the way you're talking about that. I'd be willing to bet everything I have here that the majority of people in the world are struggling with the same thing, the sense of worth, the sense of belonging. So, you know, and people always are trying to figure out, you know, that I'm deserving even of things. You know, I don't care who you are, white, it doesn't matter what color, everyone goes through that in their mind. Yeah. And I think it's very interesting that that's kind of what became very obvious to you as you were sort of kind of reintegrating again. Yeah. And wow, yeah, that's very interesting. I hadn't had that perspective before, but it actually puts us all on the same plane of being very similar. Like you said, you know, being diverse is a good thing, but also being included is a good thing. So it's very interesting how the dynamics are working there.
Absolutely. And it doesn't take a near death or a death experience to realize like, this is how you're feeling. And there is this sense of powerlessness or hopelessness that kind of comes from it. But you actually do have the agency in many ways to at least control that narrative that you're feeding yourself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. Definitely. And it's just a matter of sitting down and spending some time thinking about it and getting to know it and understand it. So, okay, wow, this is good. It's going in a good direction here. So how has positioning your business around DEI, you know, and also kind of leading with your purpose here, helped you grow or innovate with your business? And AJ, we'll start with you on this question.
So I think, you know, because of my journey and everything, one thing that became immediately clear to me, especially after COVID-19 and even more so after, you know, the murder of Mr. George Floyd that happened back in May, and the social justice, the call for social justice that happened across the board, right? That was actually a space where, at least in my network, it didn't matter again what our outside looked like. This was a moment where many of us, even though it may have been the first time we realized it, we're realizing, oh, things aren't out right, and we really need to do something about it. So I, you know, and in the case of immigrants, for instance, they don't know the 450-year history, because they're not taught that in their schools, which was my reality. So my first thing through all of this was, as I made all these realizations, I had to learn myself. So taking that time and having that intention to say, okay, I need to learn what I need to know. I need to learn what I need to learn. I need to learn the truth about these inequities, these disparities, and, you know, outside of everything that I've learned, what else am I missing? Addressing those blind spots and gaps. As I did that, I realized one of the big things is that in corporate or small business or whatever spaces we're in, leadership development is always relegated to just those little silos. So corporate is like, you know, a 9 to 5. Entrepreneurs have like their entrepreneurial leadership, which is more than 9 to 5, but they still think in those terms. And I was sitting there going, you know, I get it. People wear 15 hats a day. 30, 40, whatever. But have we forgotten that they all go on the same head? And it's that head that we need to take care of, not the hats. Doesn't matter how much bling we put on all these hats. Like, let's nourish that head first. And that was how it led me to, so everything I do is whole person leadership development. For bold, inclusive action, for leadership presence. So I love working, especially with women, to help them not increase their leadership skills, but their leadership presence. Because those are so different. Because women are highly competent, but we're just not visible enough. For various reasons. So that's all of this. Like, long story short, that's how all of these things kind of pieced up together to create my whole person leadership development program, which you actually see right above my head.
That's good. That's good. I mean, you've really taken kind of this broad perspective of what's happening in your world and your purpose, and you've really developed a whole program and business around how to kind of help other companies work through that and to help raise raise the ability for everyone to work together and kind of flatten things a little bit more, so we don't have this extreme hierarchy or even what do they call it, white supremacy, so we don't have a supremacy happening.
You're far too kind. All I like to say is, all I want to do is break the silo cultures and then dismantle two myths. One is this work-life balance myth, because work and life are not two different planets. Work is a part of life. And two, that there's a shortage of diverse talent. That's all I want to do, is show how all of these things come together. And when you realize it, your business is going to just blow up and thrive in the best ways possible.
Yeah, I like that. Heather, I'm sure you can tap into this.
Yes, for sure. When I think about ways that I've kind of shifted some positioning this year, for me, the beauty in this space and time that we're all collectively experiencing right now, the weight of the coronavirus pandemic, as well as the social injustices that we're experiencing in the world right now, and specifically in America, I was called to action and felt very compelled, actually, to update the frameworks and the content for my 6-month signature group coaching program that I do for entrepreneurs. That is a program that had information in there regarding diversity and belonging, but I was involved in several open forum type discussions a little earlier this year, again, after the George Floyd murder situation, that I was able to really gain some more insight into what's missing here in terms of understanding and what is needed in terms of solutions for helping to support the entrepreneurial community. So the overall curriculum has been upgraded, and specifically modules related to, like I said, the diversity and belonging, which really focuses on the importance of valuing diversity and difference in businesses large and small. So I'm making that the best that it can possibly be in order to meet the needs of those leaders that are seeking the support for change and for future progress, because we're at a really pivotal time right now where many have raised their hands. And I think, as a member of the Black community, I think we are still waiting to see that there will be, some carry out of some of the change that has been communicated. And there's a willingness by me and my company, obviously, to support that change for those that are really just trying to find their way. I know AJ just mentioned, initially starting with yourself. That would be the absolute best place to start, with ourselves in terms of understanding, to start filling in gaps. But then to have that knowledge and understanding reach a broader community that's where support like that we provide is likely, where we have people who may reach out.
Definitely. And I think you are both right on with it starts with ourselves. I mean, that's key. I mean, everyone's a leader to some degree. So we've got to start with ourselves, if we need to reframe our beliefs or core values even, there's so much going on right now that we need to really open our eyes and come together as a human species and let's make it better. It doesn't have to be this way. And so I think you're right on. It starts with ourselves. So let's start taking a look at that and let's see what happens. We can only make it better, right? So.
Yeah. And I think having grace with yourself is important. You don't know what you don't know, but there's been just a really huge awakening, I think, in many instances. And with that comes some responsibility to just dig a little deeper.
I agree. So, okay. So we've talked about some shifts and things. So how has all this kind of impacted your relationships with clients and prospects? Heather, you mentioned you went back and you kind of started upgrading and changing and refining the programs, but even putting your programs together in the first place when you're out there kind of selling it. And same way with you, AJ, very personal experiences, and you're kind of molding a program around ways to kind of help people from something that you've been seeing. So when you're out there building these relationships with clients and prospects, do they care? I mean, do you see companies going, you're right, we need to do something about this? With that, I'm gonna talk to Heather first. I'd like to hear your perspective.
Yeah, in response to the question, do they care? I will have to say that some do, not all. It's just really not a strategic priority for some, but there are many that do care. And I think we have witnessed that over the last several months, just in terms of, people raising their hand to say, okay, I've got to make some change. For me, the overall impact of client relationships this year has been quite positive. And I think it's related to the nature of my role as a coach and as a consultant, is that people trust me as a sounding board. So through, those conversations, through inquiry, I help them to see themselves without judgment, and I think that's a key piece of this. It's almost a topic where there's a lot of shame that exists there with some people around it. And I think having the opportunity of a trusted advisor to be able to open up those conversations is really key. When I look at what some of the challenges might be regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives with companies, it kind of runs the gamut. I mean, there are ethnic and cultural differences. As I had mentioned earlier, there's some generational and age differences. And one of the big things is this also the very important issue of emotional discomfort. People tend to resist this, even the conversations around it. Even if you somehow know that you want to do better, there is that resistance there that I think is actually quite normal when it comes to engaging in, change as it relates to it. But, when we look at the racial spectrum of the United States, it's changing every single year. And when we look at the statistics within, our workplaces, in order to be relevant and to be inclusive business leaders, we really have a lot of work that we have to do to keep up with the pace of change in our families and our communities and in the world. I was actually looking at a statistic from the consulting firm Deloitte, and diversity and inclusion they say it's not a human resources strategy, it is a business strategy. And it does have bottom line impact. Again, AJ mentioned how important it is to diversify the workforce and to, increase, higher level positions as it relates to that diversity. And it's really necessary at this time if you want to remain relevant as a company. And research also shows that teams that operate within that inclusive, within an inclusive culture outperform their peers by 80%. So that's huge. So I think that not only is the world shifting, but if we really take a closer look at our teams, and like I said, for those companies that don't necessarily have large teams, you might outsource to one person, you know, that you work with. It's really, you know, having that be top of mind.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. You know, you're saying it's more of a business strategy. And I think when you put it in that perspective, there might be companies that or leaders in companies don't always necessarily want to admit that they don't understand or know something about it, because then there's vulnerability and maybe I haven't done my homework as a good leader and all of that. So suddenly it starts putting some very interesting tension around this in terms of, okay, should I get vulnerable here as a leader and say, you know, I don't know, so we're going to bring in some people who can help make this happen. So I think that's very interesting. You know, that's a big part of kind of what you're doing there, is you're building that trust with these leaders and letting them know that they can confide in you, and basically you'll work with them to make it happen. Then I love it. It's good.
Yeah.
So AJ, I'd like to kind of hear your perspective around this one here. You know, do you run to clients who might have a little bit of resistance or something, and you know, do they care?
Yeah. Yes. And so I want to answer that question very briefly, but then I want to reframe that question too.
Okay.
One is, do I run into problems and do they care? The do they care part, I'll get to it later, you know, when I reframe. Do I run into problems? Absolutely. Just this year, if I had a single dollar for every time I've heard either, oh yeah, I'd love to focus on DEI, but you know, our budget given unprecedented times, ... Or again, I'd love to focus on, you know, DEI, but given the shortage of diverse talent, ... I could retire by next year. Just $1 for every time, you know? Now, does that mean that people don't care? No, I think Heather was absolutely spot on, and the stats are absolutely spot on, that the majority of the companies are still only looking at this as a business case instead of as a human imperative. And so this is where I'm going to reframe your question of do they care to, should you care as a business owner? Absolutely. Because everything that Heather said, right? The racial constructs, the gender constructs, the class constructs, age, generational differences, all of those, they all play into it because it's all interconnected. So what we know is that, I mean, if you think about it, something like, you know, transgender people, right? Transgender people have always existed since the beginning of humanity. But it's only now that we're starting to think about full human rights for them. So diversity has always existed. It's the equity and the inclusion that have been a problem. Now, keeping that in mind, let's consider that as business owners and as, you know, aspiring leaders or leaders, as we kind of get older, you know, and become these role models and pillars in our communities, our kids are going into a much more diverse environment in terms of the language, in terms of the communication, in terms of the labels we put, right? We have a dozen more labels now. What labels are they going to be part of? And do we want them to be discriminated against? Do we want them to have equitable opportunities that meet their needs? As leaders and as entrepreneurs, we already know we run the economy. Like the entire US economy is actually on the shoulders of small business owners and entrepreneurs. Society is as well, because we get to shape our future together. And why would we not want a future that, bottom line, opens us up to new markets while allowing us to connect on a human level?
Yeah, definitely.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's, you know, it's there's a huge opportunity here to start shifting. And they say small business is the backbone of the country. So why can't it start with small businesses? And it's the way, it's the way we think, the way we work, our messaging, even the photographs that we have on our websites. I mean, it's really pay attention to what's going on, so that, you can have an impact in more ways than one. It doesn't have to be by just going to rallies and things of that nature. You can do it, you can say it, show it, and do it with the way you run your business.
Exactly. And I just want to add like one little example here. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion here, somehow, the white American population is this like weird baseline as if it's the standard, which I don't mean weird in a judgmental way. I mean weird in a completely scientific way. Because if you think about it, and I'm going to use myself as an example here, the first time I saw a white person in my life was when I was 14 years old. That wasn't my majority. That was not my baseline. Now imagine that our kids and their kids are going to be growing into that reality as well, especially as globalization increases. They could be anywhere. Do we want to set them up for success so that they can get along with everybody and like actually communicate and be leaders wherever they are? Or are we going to restrict them to our little pockets?
Yeah, right on. Yeah. It's not regionalized anymore. We're talking, this is a global world now, especially with all of the social media and being with the internet. People see things globally regularly. Yeah. So it's a different world, and we need to act accordingly. Absolutely. So here's a good one then. We were talking a little bit about the negative. So we seem to only hear about the struggles and these roadblocks, about creating positive change around DEI. And that also in a same sense makes it seem very daunting to even attempt to do something about it. So for our listeners today, I'd like to hear about some of the successes you guys have had to show that things can be done. You can make a difference, and it doesn't have to be a massive, huge move. It can be just taking small steps every day. So with that, I'd like to kind of, let's start with Heather on this one. And, let's hear a little bit about some of these success stories so that people here know it can be done.
Yeah, one that comes to mind for me. So I actually have a long-term client that I have an executive coaching relationship with. So this is someone who happens to manage a team. My client is a white woman, and she manages a team of all Black employees. And, needless to say, this year when this whole situation arose after the George Floyd murder, we basically, in one of the coaching sessions that I had with her, she was telling me about what was going on with the team and what she felt like they were experiencing, but just really felt disconnected from what that experience may have been for them. So with that said, we shifted the engagement that we had to where I offered up some facilitated discussion with her as the team leader, who was struggling with this relatability with her team and what their, true day-to-day experience was and going through that. So we did a series of like roundtable discussions that I was able to facilitate and kind of help support bridging the gap there. She is an awesome leader and continues to want to, serve her team and do really well by them. And, she opened up to that offer that I had put on the table as, let's go a little bit deeper here and ensure that the transparency and the connectedness remains intact over time, just based on how it is that you're feeling. So anyway, with that said, we had a few conversations, and, there were many things that were brought up that were relevant for them as individuals. And what might best meet their needs alongside the broader company initiatives and that were in place within that organization. And the overall result was, just these really in-depth, honest conversations And it brought about a more cohesive and engaged team. And I attribute all of that to her, you know, her willingness to get uncomfortable. Because she told me in the beginning, she said, this is, you know, it's not necessarily a place that I feel like I can, you know, do this. And with raising her hand to say, hey, I would like to have some support, you know, in moving through this, it turned out to be really ideal for her and also for her team. And they continue to kind of move forward at this point. So that was one of the great successes, I would say, of this year. Was really, I don't know, it was eye-opening to see this type of a conversation. I felt like it was a forced conversation just based on what was going on, you know, in the world, but also voluntary, in that she said, no, I want to go a step further with this and really remain connected with my people and even go deeper.
So kind of what you were saying earlier too, you know, the small step was her making a shift in herself and her thinking. Exactly. And her comfort level. It wasn't some big major thing. It was her making that shift inside.
Yes.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, it doesn't take a lot to make a big change. All right. Yeah. So AJ, I'd like to hear your perspective around this, and if you have some success stories to share.
Yeah. You know, first, like Heather, that was like, I had goosebumps when you were telling me about this story, because as I was hearing it, I don't know if you saw the smile on my face, but I was like, oh, she shifted like her perspective and she took responsibility and she held herself accountable. And that's what caused it. Because for me, that's what it boils down to, is that we actually can hold ourselves accountable to whatever expectations we set for ourselves. And the impact of that gets so amplified when we're intentional about it. So some of some success stories. For me, success is always about the impact. I think, Alan, you know that about me. So I know that when COVID first started, I just felt this like, that fear that everybody was feeling. And, all stereotypes aside, I do have a lot of friends who are medical doctors. As much as we joke about that, I do. So there was this palpable sense of fear for me, because here were my friends risking their lives to make sure we were all okay. And it was like that. It was that moment, like, it doesn't matter how empowered we are. We all have those imposter syndrome flare-ups that come up. And like I was saying, like that moment of, man, are we important enough? Like, are we doing enough? Are we serving well enough? Look at my friends, they're risking their lives and I'm a coach, those kind of things. But I was like, okay, wait a minute. So I actually decided to create free coaching for all frontline healthcare workers. And I had no idea where it was going to go, but I was like, listen, this is not therapy. This is not, it's a coaching thing, but it's very action oriented. It's very future oriented. All I want to do is kind of help ground you in your purpose of why you're doing this, and take a moment to personally thank you for your work, because I get to do that when it's one-on-one. And man, it was mind blowing. I ended up having to, I ended up coaching doctors from all across the country and getting to hear their stories and getting to remind them that they're heroes. And it would fill my cup so much every day that I was like, hey, you know what? Yeah, I'm not on the front line, but this is great. Then the C3EB Summit got created out of it, which is coming up next week. And, Alan, you're sharing your story there next week too. But the entire C3EB Summit, this summit that shines the spotlight on voices that have been historically marginalized. All of it came out of everything that we went through this year. And then I ended up like winning an award from it. I ended up being on a few magazine covers and like blah, blah, all of those kind of like extra accessories and everything. But when you think about all of this came from me just being like, I gotta be able to do something. what can I do if I take personal responsibility? Like I have some privilege and I don't have some privilege. Okay, how can I channel the privilege I do have to make something happen? And it literally just, that's all it was. It was just that I dreamt it, I set intention, and then I just went at it. And then the impact just kept amplifying. I mean, the inaugural C3EB Summit had over 11,000 views. So people liked it.
Yeah, I like the whole notion of kind of leveraging that privilege to help make the change, and use that as the lever, and to help more people as a result of that. Kind of take the privilege that you have and pay it forward, so to speak. Yep. So I really like that. And you guys both have examples here of just almost kind of like following your heart and allowing other people start engaging with what you're doing to help make that change happen. And by doing that, you start creating that change within each person. And that's really where it starts. You both started with your internal change and shift, and you inspire that in others. And that is really cool. And it shows people that it's not a huge effort. Just like you did earlier, kind of reframe it so that you can start moving forward, and people will catch on. And if they like what you're doing and see what you're doing, they'll say, what do you got going on here? Tell me more. And then it'll just keep growing. So I like that. You've proven that it doesn't take a huge initiative to make it, to make a change. So very good, very good. So I see 2021 as the year of change and transition. As leaders, we have the opportunity to create this change in and through our businesses, and which ultimately can impact the world. So what are top 3 things you would recommend leaders of organizations do to make this lasting change and to have the impact that they would love to have around diversity, equity, and inclusion? So I guess with that, we'll start. I'll start with Heather.
Okay. The 3 things that come to mind for me are what we kind of focus on in our work. One is, shifting from diversity to inclusion. And with that, the diversity meaning, what's the makeup of your workforce, versus inclusion, answering the question, how do we create a work environment and a culture that enables all employees to participate and thrive? AJ spoke about, that whole person being able to come to work is really, really what's key right now. So going from diversity to inclusion as it relates to how you move forward from here with this. And the other thing, the next thing would be going from, taking a look at what your brand identity is. That is very, very key and needs to be strong. But you also want to shift that to individual identities, or I would say elevate that along with that brand identity to really look at, because we don't want the company to come first at the expense of the individuals that work there, So we really do have work to do as leaders as it relates to integrating that overall. And, the way that we're set up, culturally in America is that the company over individual is very deeply embedded into our workforce. That's how we operate. So we need to take a look at, what's really going to modernize that for all of us going forward is going to be knowing that our employees, they want to demonstrate ownership. So those standardized ways of doing things are now taking a back seat. So just having that awareness of, not only elevating your brand identity, but the individual identity of those that work within your company. And then lastly, I would say looking at both mission and contribution. So leaders today, they really know what it is that what they stand for. They know what they stand for. And they also really want, studies have shown, they want purpose and meaning in their work. So when people don't know who they are, that is something that kind of keeps them up at night. And I just think, AJ spoke about, this whole work-life integration thing and how key that is, and especially now with so many people even working from home, it's all just kind of like become one big thing, work and home. And quite honestly, I think it always was. We like to think there was this big separation between the two, but again, we're humans first. So with that said, we want to be able to express ourselves wholeheartedly at home and at work. So, and people really want to be self-directed with whatever those differences are that they have. They want to be able to bring that into an autonomous type of a work environment so that they can contribute as best as they can. So that would be what I would have to say regarding that.
Yeah, those are all three, actually more than three, but those are all really good points. And I think they can all be chipped away at. And those all seem like very realistic things to bring into a culture of a business, and to start, elaborating on the brand foundation so that it has more depth. It's not just a mission and a vision and core values. It starts becoming more human, and having a brand become more human actually attracts more people to it. So yeah. I think you've brought a lot of really good things there to that. I think it could be invaluable for a business to start really rethinking how they are going to incorporate it at that level. So AJ, I'd like to kind of hear your perspective on this one.
I swear, if I nodded my head anymore at Heather, everything Heather was saying, my head would have fallen off because I felt like a bubblehead, because I agree with everything. I was just like, yeah, oh, my neck hurts. But no, 100% everything that Heather said. I mean, those are such astute observations. I think for us to move forward into 2021, I'm going to go back to, kind of piggyback and jump off of what Heather said and use my own language around it. One, making your own invisible visible to be a better leader. What are the blind spots that you may have unintentionally ignored? But more importantly, what are the blind spots that you're ignoring because you just feel uncomfortable about it? Because growth is painful. Growth is uncomfortable. That's why it's called growing pains. They didn't call it growing Candyland for a reason. So if you're not experiencing growing pains, what are you not addressing? What about yourself as a leader do you need to make visible to yourself so that then you can think about how it is showing up in the world around you? As a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as a family person, as a friend, whatever, because again, it's about you as a person. At the end of the day, all those hats go on your head. And then the second one is, we all know change is constant, especially as entrepreneurs who've gone through 2020 and all of the pivots we've had to go through. I think that part's obvious. But how much time do we take to acknowledge our learning through those moments? What is the self-talk happening there? Are we lamenting everything that's happened and, oh my gosh, my business could have made $250,000, but I lost this? Or are we actually, as Heather said earlier, giving ourselves grace, acknowledging our roles and our contributions, so that those learnings that have happened are actually sustainable? Because we get it that we're imperfect. All of us are. Come on now, And then the third one I'd say is, how can you reclaim your inner power so that you can give it away? Part of that comes back to that privilege, part of it comes back to acknowledging the privilege, but part of it is also that because of all of these external messages and imposter syndrome and all of that, we let other people in some ways take away our power that doesn't belong to them. When we can reclaim that, especially as entrepreneurs, because as entrepreneurs, we're our personal brand, right? So if we're not showing up in that, what are people seeing about us? What are our employees seeing about us? And if we have to empower them, we have to be empowered. So how can we reclaim all of these power leaks so that we can give it away freely and amplify the impact we have with that?
I like that very much. And I think there's a lot to that reclaiming, because I think just what's going on is my personal perspective here. So I just think a lot of things that are going on in society, it just sucks that all out of us. And, you know, we all want to be part of something so bad that we're willing to give up who we really are inside to be part of that. And as a result, we actually start creating the separation between one another.
Exactly.
Which, you know, yeah. Anyway, so, wow. Yeah, those are, both of you had some very, very good insights, very good things that we can start taking a look at. I know for me, there's a lot here I can walk away with and start making changes already with my business. Actually, it would start with me, because I'm going to do some journaling and some shadow work, things like that, to really take a look at what's happening here with me and what's being reflected out there in the world through me, and start fixing that, start reclaiming who I am, so I can go out there and share that with other people. I really like what both of you had to bring to the table today, and I think that it is highly doable for everyone on this call, anyone who listens to this. And I really appreciate everything that you're bringing today. So, kind of in closing, I'd like to thank you for being here today and sharing all of your insights and wisdom. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending. And I hope that you all enjoyed this conversation. There's a lot of stuff going on here, a lot of things that we were talked about. And I think it's taken this craziness in the world and it's really brought it down to a nice, doable, self-adjustment that can be done. And we can all go out there and make a difference, have an impact. And so I guess if anyone has any follow-up questions, please send them to info@consciousbranding.com and we will respond to you. And we'll be sending you a follow-up link to the recording of this episode, along with some bonus materials. So feel free to share this with other business owners you think would be interested. And our next Thrivecast episode is on December 8th. So, and it's about keeping yourself energized while leading your business. So I look forward to seeing everyone in December. And remember, you create your world. So believe in your vision, drive it with purpose, and above all, take action. So until next time, be remarkable. So I thank you all for being here today.